Hi there. So thanks for joining. In this webinar, I'm going to look at using expressions to create dots themes animation. So going to show you the animation now. Okay. So we're going to look at sort of taking expressions and sort of tweaking them and amending them and creating control layers and basically sort of setting up a project so that you're able to sort of tweak assets within it sort of, easily and sort of focus on the creative part of it of, animating it. We're also going to sort of look at analyzing your work and sort of being critical of sort of how you can improve it and sort of tweak it and sort of finesse it and bring it up to a better standard. So the first version of this was, so it's quite simple and it works fine and it's not totally horrific, but you want to sort of develop a critical eye and look at elements of the animation and the design and how it can be sort of improved and finessed. So before we start, I should probably give a sort of shout out to a tutorial that I got inspired by for this, which is this Place Objects Along a Path tutorial by AE Scripts and Plugins. So, I mean, most people, if you're doing motion graphics, I'm sure most of you are looking on YouTube at tutorials and seeing what's out there and sort of self-teaching yourself, and that's fine. Beginner, you'll do it as a beginner, and you'll do it even when you consider yourself a professional. There's always new stuff to learn out there. So it's a tutorial which sort of shows you how to align objects to a mask path, and it wasn't something that I knew how to do, and it's a good, that's my cat, shh, so it's not something that I knew how to do at first, and it's fine. It sort of teaches you the basics, and we'll briefly go along with it, but I definitely recommend, as sort of if you're following this webinar, to check out this tutorial. And I think when it gets posted live, I'll try and make sure that the link is posted with it. But it's good because it sort of shows you the technique, but it doesn't end up with a finished piece of work that you copy, because there's a lot of, in the industry at the moment, and especially with beginners, there's a lot of copying a tutorial and doing exactly the same thing, and people ending up with exactly the same work. And that's fine, but you want to sort of have your own visual voice, if that's not sort of oxymoronic, but you want to have your own design and your own style. So you want to put your own sort of fingerprint on your work. So you can actually download the project file on this tutorial. So they've made it available. So I definitely recommend checking out the project. So what I did was I downloaded it and used that as a starting point. So let's just have a look at that in its sort of raw form. So we've got these object layers, and they're just shape layers in After Effects, and they're expression linked to this mask path here. So we've got a layer down here, and if I drop the opacity, if you're in your timeline, you press U, it's going to reveal any keyframes on any of the layers if you don't have any layers selected. So you can see that these are all animated, but there's only one set of keyframes here. So that was the appeal, was to have a rig in After Effects where you can animate a load of shapes, have as many shapes as you want, and have them all following one set of keyframes. So it just makes the animation side of it a lot easier. Excuse me. So let's have a look at the expression on these. So if we press EE on one of the objects to reveal the expression, and we've got for the position, we have to highlight this last line here, which is basically directing this object to this comp layer. So it's saying in this comp, look for a layer called path. And if I just move this up, you can see that the path layer is on a solid called path. And it specifies the mask as well. So mask 1, which is mask 1. And then this part here this is the magic part of the expression. Mask path dot point on path. So that's saying align the object to this mask path here. And they've got another line of code above here, which we'll look at in a second, but I'm just going to isolate this and look at it in its sort of basic form. Okay, so they've changed it. So I'm gonna type it back to what it originally was. Okay. So this is, so we ignore all the other objects. This is the code in its raw form. And if we turn on the shape layer, just drop the opacity down. Okay. So this percentage this determines where on the path that object's going to appear, and it's a value between 0 and 1. So this is a closed path. So what we're going to do is just create a new path here, because the beginning and end of this closed path is the same. So now if I press M for mask, and I've got mask 2 there, so I can just change this code and say look at mask 2 instead. And then if I change this value to 0, so it's now jumped to the beginning of the path. And then if I change that to 1, and it's now at the end. So this percentage value is exactly where on the mask path the object is. T is time, so it's where in time the object is. So at the moment it's not animated. So if we animate it, so I'm just going to get rid of the first mask, okay, and just add a keyframe. So it's moving, so it's sticking with the end of the, I mean, that's horrific animation, but just to sort of show you. Now we could input a number value for t. So we could put t equals 1. And that 1 means 1 second. So it's saying at 1 second, that's where I want you to stick to that mask path, okay? Now at the moment, it's not animated, but if we now move these keyframes across, but then when we scrub across the timeline, it stays there. So that t is a fixed value. When you have time written in there, it's just saying, just follow it in time, wherever it is. So that's the expression in its basic form. And so to start making it customizable, we want to sort of, what we're approaching is something like this. Okay. So I'm just gonna turn off this adjustment layer. So this is the finished setup that we're going to create. Okay, and what we've got here is a control null, and on that control null we've just got sliders to control the parameters of all the objects. So it makes the animation a lot easier if we have one control null and we're able to keyframe all the elements in there rather than digging around. And if I unshy this, you know, digging around in our timeline and sort of keyframing certain elements, because this is kind of, you know, it's almost like sort of a flock of objects for, you know, following a shape. So you certainly don't want to be animating each of the individual objects. That'll take absolutely forever. It's going to be a lot easier if you just have one master controller for everything. So this is where everything's set up, and we've got our, you know, we're animating our mask path here, but you can see we've got a bit of bounce on those objects now, and you can see that the size of these is now changing because we've got now parameters for the scale, maximum and minimum scale, so we can scale them up. And we can also adjust the frequency of the bounce as well. And another good thing with this rig is we can increase or decrease the number of circles with one slider, and it's going to distribute them for us. We're not having to turn any on and off, or, you know, they're all hidden, they're all there. And you'll notice that there's 50, but we're specifying values. And if we go above 50, nothing's happening. And in fact, it's clamped to a fixed value. We've actually got 51 because we've got 0, 0 there. So I'm going to get rid of those keyframes. You might have left some keyframes on there, but that's fine. Okay, so one expression that's handy to use in this instance is our approach is going to be taking one of these objects and adding all the expressions and controls and all the maths, doing all the sort of laborious expression parenting work on that one layer. And then when we know it's working, we can just duplicate that layer. And because we've spent the time setting up the controls, we can sort of focus on the animation. So one expression it's good to, I'm kind of using it a lot at the moment, is it's called this layer.nameSplit. Okay, and I can't remember if I've already got this applied. Yeah, I have. So let's try and add it to okay, I'm going to sort of add it to a layer that doesn't have it already. But if you don't know expressions by heart, and I certainly don't, it's worth having a document with them in. So you could have a Word document, or, you know, Google Docs or something like that. I've got in a very sort of low-tech way, I've got a document sat in a folder that makes no rhyme or reason, but I've got some of the expressions that I use a lot in here. So you can just, you know, when you're just starting out, it's fine to just copy and paste the expressions, and then knowing where to tweak them, you know, when you need to. So I've got the this layer.nameSplit, I've actually got written up here. So if I mess up typing it up, then I can refer to that, but I'm going to give it a try anyway. So okay, so actually let's go into this and just get rid of right, we're going to get rid of the layer.nameSplit. So it's just, actually it does need plus equals, yeah, so it does need that. So okay, so this part, this linear part, we should have a look at that. So I'm going to put a slider on put it on this object layer. And what I'm going to do is just call this X. And this is going to be our layer.name split. So I'm going to drop down, press E for effects, drop it down, and then Alt click on the slider to create this expression. And let's say, so I'm going to just type in Y equals this layer dot name dot split, and we want sort of like speech marks and a comma and then a colon. Then on the next line, Y. Okay. So what this does, this line here, is it says look at the actual layer name itself. So in this case, we've called this shape layer object 01, and we've put a comma on there. So what it's saying is look for a comma, and then it sort of splits up the name of that object with the comma, and then the Y1 says look at what's after the comma, because After Effects starts with 0. So if you had Y0, it would be looking at the object text itself, and it wouldn't give you a numeric. It wouldn't result in a numeric value. It might even give you an expression error. Yeah. So there'd be an expression error. Y1. Now we could add another comma, and then after that, if we put like 120, so 132, we've now got two commas in this name. So if we say look after the second comma, it now gives us a value of 132. So this might seem, I don't want to do that. So this might seem like a bit of a faff, but the reason for doing this is once we've set everything up in our layer and we've done all the rigging and expression control, you can just Control D this layer, and as it's already set up, it's already aligning itself around the mask path. But we'll look at why it's doing that. So it's thinking just set up one layer correctly and do all the sort of hard work there, and then you can duplicate it, and just everything's controlled by a control knob. So let's just go into the position again, and we need to look at this linear expression. Now, just briefly, because I don't want to get bogged down too much in all just explaining expressions. But this is what this linear expression does, is it takes a predetermined set of values. So in this case, the percentage, it's saying look at PRC, which is our, let's call it this X1. It's basically the shape number. So in this case, it's 01. Okay, and it's saying ultimately you want to output. So it's saying there's going to be between 0 and 10 of these layers. So that's why when we duplicate this 9 times, we have 10 layers, and they're all evenly distributed around. Okay, so let's just do that again. Okay. Now, if we duplicate any more than that, nothing's going to happen. Okay, because they've manually inputted this value of look at the values between 0 and 10, and then assign a value proportionally between 0 and 1. So what it does is it sort of crushes those values down. So it crushes down 0 and 10 to be a value between 0 and 1, and then that's how it distributes them around the mask path. I realise this is incredibly boring, this part of it, so we're gonna just move on to the next part and hopefully get to the fun stuff. So add in a layer count expression. So and I put notes here to remind myself what to talk about. So what would be handy is knowing how many layers we've got ultimately. So to be able to sort of increase them and decrease them and then have them aligned properly along a mask path, for example, it'd be good to know how many we've got in total so we can divide them by other parameters. And one expression which is handy for that. And again, in sorry, just took a second to look at the chat. So in the description, when this project, when the webinar's uploaded, I'll try to make sure that there's like helpful links that you can access. But in this case, I'm just going to copy and paste this layer count code. So what this does is you can apply it to, and I'm just going to delete the null that I applied it to. So I'm going to create a new null and call this count, and pop this down the bottom of the layer stack. And because I've got terrible OCD, I have to use the sort of the colors for layers, and it just helps me visually. It helps them visually stand out. It's actually not completely OCD. I'm being a bit too hard on myself, but I definitely have OCD. But I'm going to grab a layer control, add it to this, and I'm going to call it object count. And again, if we alt-click on that slider, it's going to bring up the expression controls box, and I'm going to paste that code. And then this is where it gets a little bit fiddly. So at the moment, the object count is giving us a value of 0, because what it's saying here is layer number, start with layer number 0. So you can actually start specifying the count to be after a certain number if you wanted to, for whatever reason. But if you want to just count all the layers in a comp, then keep that layer number at 0. Layer starts with layer. Okay, and that's the only time on camera I'm going to do that probably. So layer, I'm going to delete that, and then type in. So I'm typing in exactly what these are called. So actually, if I'm clever, I'll just copy and paste it so I don't make any mistakes. Okay. So now it's given us a value of 10. And then if we start duplicating those, 13. Okay. So now we've got a null which is counting all the objects in our scene, called objects, or whatever we want to call them, in this case objects. So that's going to be handy for when we can create expression controls later on. What else? Yeah, okay. So let's go back to this linear expression that we looked at before. Now, having this manually input as 10 is limiting, because we don't want to go in and manually adjust the code on these layers. We want to set it up on one and then move on with our lives. So what would be handy is if we can have this just determined by however many there are in the scene. And at the moment, we've got, because we've got this layer count, if I press E, we can actually add a line. So these are all just parameters here. So when you do a colon, an expression code, you can go into the next line and we can say count equals, and then put this over to the slider. Now it hasn't changed the expression or anything because we haven't used that count in anything here. So everything else works fine. But now if we input count instead of 13, instead of 10, that's still going to be 10 because we've got that many here. Now, if we copy this expression code, and what you can do is go copy expression only, and then paste it. And just to check that it's worked, I'm going to go to one of the other ones and press EE to reveal the expression. And yeah, that's the same. So it's now looking at values between 0 and whatever the total count is. So now if we duplicate these layers, you see they're aligning themselves now without us having to go in and manually input the code. Okay, so that's pretty handy. So we're sort of on our way to setting things up where we can sort of have everything sort of expression controlled. Okay, so the next step is, yeah, adding controls to the number of circles. Okay, so let's, okay. Right. So because I've deleted that expression control, all of these are just sat there because their expressions are probably broken. If I press EE, yeah, okay. So now I'm just going to delete all of these. And because when we set it up correctly, they're going to align themselves properly. So all I need to do is just carry on duplicating. So let's press EE and see what we've got in the expression. Okay, so here, the second value is actually set to look at a number of circles. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a control null, and it's going to determine the number of circles, and then that's going to affect all of these. So I'm just going to change this back to 10 again. Okay, so it works. And we can just check that it works by having our mask path on. Okay, so I'm going to grab a null and then call it control, and just turn it off because we don't need to see it. It's just a null there. We just want it to sit there. We just want it to be something that we can put sliders on. So I'm going to add a slider and call this number of circles. And I typed that incorrectly, doesn't matter. Okay, so let's set this to 5 for now. And then let's go into the expression and add another parameter. So let's call this TC for total circles. And then enter, and need to be able to see that to pick whip it too. So just grabbing the pick whip and putting it over to the slider, and then just add the semicolon at the end. And again, this doesn't change because we haven't assigned that to anything. So we can add all sorts, we can add as many parameters as we want, but if they're not being used in the actual code here, they're not going to get used. So here, so this 10, instead of a value of 10, we want the value to be TC, which is the total number of circles. Okay. So now duplicate it. So we've got 5 circles. And then if we duplicate any more than 5, nothing happens. In fact, they're all stuck on this endpoint. Okay, they're not going anywhere. But if we then adjust the number of circles with our control null, so we can do that up here. So we can now increase or decrease the number of circles. Now, if we go above the number of circles that we've actually got, it messes it up. That's not necessarily a problem if you know how many circles you've got in there, but it would be nice if you weren't able to do that. So we can actually add a clamp expression to this, and So here's the clamp expression. So I'm just going to copy this part of it, math.floor, and I'm actually going to add that to my document because I don't use the clamp expression very often, and be handy to, you sort of learn them as you go along. So this layer.name split, I'm using this a lot, so I can sort of type that off out of memory, but the clamp one, I don't, honestly. So yeah, so clamp. So we're going to grab that, go back to our so go back to our control now, and so we want x equals, and okay, I'm going to just going to hide these layers. So we're going to use our number count. So we're going to use the expression that counts the total number of circles, and that's going to be our max value. So we're going to say x equals, and in this case, x is just, it's just an arbitrary parameter. We're just calling it x. We could call it, let's call it, we've got TC for total number of circles. Maybe CC for circles count. That's probably no better or worse than X, but okay, drag that down. So CC in this case equals 13 because that's the total number we've got. And semicolon and the next, and then we're just going to paste the, pasted totally the wrong expression there. There we go. Math.floor. So this is the clamping part. I need to get rid of that. So math.floor and then clamp value, and you've got a min value. And we could expression control that minimum value, but we'll leave it at 1. We're never going to have fewer than 1 objects in our scene, but the max is going to be CC. So now our actual controller, we can't input a value more than, so you see when I highlight it, I've got 23 in there. So I've selected 23, but it's outputting 15. And if we go down to 13, that's fine. Going 14 is fine, 15. Then as soon as we start going higher, it's basically like, yeah, fine, type it in all you want. I'm only going to output 15, so it clamps the value. So that's quite handy to have. Yes, so the next thing which could be a bit problematic is, let's duplicate a few more of these and see if we can see the issue. So this is tricky to see, but what's happening to those extra layers, the extra circles that we don't need, they're basically all sat, if we select them all, or even better, drag. What a perfect time for autosave. I'll grab a drink. This is quite a big project, so it's taken a while to save. It's one thing to bear in mind with expressions. The more complicated and the more extraneous code you've got in the expressions, the bigger the project can get and the longer it can take to save. He waffled as it gets saved. So let's see. Yeah, so we've got all of the layers that we're not using are just sat there. And that's not ideal because you'll get like scrunchy edges because they're all sat on top of each other. So the aliasing on the edge of those layers is all being added up and it's not going to look good. And it's also not, just doesn't feel very tidy as well. if you've got OCD. So what would be handy is if there's an expression which will turn them on and off based on whether or not you need them. And for that, we can use this if-else expression. So this basically gives you a binary choice. So in this case, you can see, you can probably guess like the 100 or the 0. We can actually apply that to opacity and decide whether or not they're turned on based on our the number of circles specified. So let's see if I can remember how to do this. So I'm going to go to object 1, just unshine that, and then shy the other ones. Go to T. Okay. So we want if the number of circles, so this sign, doing this backwards, is greater than, and then you've got an equal. So if it's greater than or equal to, and so I think we want to do if the number of circles is greater than or equal to, so the total count of the circles, sorry, is greater than or equal to the total number of circles, 100 else. Okay. What it might want us to do is just put those in parameters. So what we're going to do is, so x equals the total number of circles, and then y equals okay, so that's 0. So it's actually the opposite way around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just swap over x and y. Okay, so now it's on. So we've got sometimes. So when I try to input them here, for a start, it looks quite messy. So it's actually good housekeeping to have the parameters sort of set up on separate lines, because then when you look at the important part of the expression, which in this case is the if x is greater than or equal to y, it's actually a lot easier to see what's going on rather than looking at all this code here. So this is a tidy way of doing it. I was being lazy before. So so it looks like that works fine. So I'm actually going to copy the opacity. And in this case, I don't have to copy the expression only. I can just copy the opacity because all the other ones are set to 100 anyway. So I'm going to mess them up. Paste, and no, it's still at 100. Okay, so gonna figure out. So the total number of circles, and let's go and figure out what we did wrong here. Of course, yeah. So we need to use the layer.name split. So we need to know specifically. So I've applied the same expression onto all the layers. Yeah, so we've got, let's copy this. I'm just gonna delete all those other layers and then just focus on this one. So okay. So we've got this layer split, which has given us our number value. So in each case, in each layer, So for example, sort of like layer 20, that's going to give us a value of 20. So actually so y equals this comp layer control and number of circles. Yep, so that's the same. Actually gonna just repick that with that. So y is the number of circles. So now it's saying if the number of circles you're asking for is greater than or equal to the number of our layer, we want 100% opacity, otherwise we want 0. So now if we duplicate, so I'm just going to manually set this down to 5. So now they're not only not showing, so I can select them. So, but if we solo them, they're actually invisible now. So we've got, these ones are 100% and those are 0%. So we've got rid of the issue of them just sort of sat there doing nothing. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is add, we've sort of got the rig sort of close to how we want it. And we can add an expression for the circle scale. I might not bother doing that for now. Actually, no, let's do that. So to create the randomness of the scale, let's move that over to here because I keep on losing it. So scale. So we can add, if we go into our control layer and add another slider, and I'm going to call this scale, duplicate, scale max, and just set 2 random values that we can tweak later on. Press E so we can see them to pick with them. And then the scale, gonna just set up our parameters again. So min, max, and then S for scale equals random, and then, so in parentheses, it's asking you what are the minimum and maximum values that you want for this randomness. So we've determined here, look at these sliders, and because we want the scale to be proportional, so we don't want the circle squashing or stretching. I'm going to put SS, so it gives us exactly the same output value for the horizontal and the vertical. And unsurprisingly, I've typed something in wrong there. I think it's simply just adding a, yeah. If you forget to add like a colon at the end of one of the lines, you'll get a hazard sign. So now we've got a random scale. The trouble is it's changing every frame because that's what the random expression does. So we just need to add at the top just a line of code that fixes that random scale, and it doesn't change it every frame. So we want to go seed random index true. So that basically, it's basically going to sort of keep it now locked, but it is based, that index, it's based on the index value. So we could amend it and change it so that it's based on the specific number of the layer. But this is fine. This is fine for now. The only issue with this later on is, you may have all the circles to be like a random scale that you really like, and if you add like another layer above it or below it, it's going to change it's going to change the index value of that. The index value is this number here. So in this case, it's 18 because it's 18 in the layer stack. That's what the index value is. But because I'm not being too precious about how big or small individual dots are, we can leave that. I'm definitely not saying all of the expression work in this project is perfect. It sort of does what I want it to do. But maybe someone who's more experienced can finesse it and tweak it. And you could probably add more parameters. You could sort of finesse it and, even more. It's a bit like animation in that way. So now we've got random scales. So we can duplicate, actually no, not duplicate. I'm going to just copy the scale and then paste it onto the other layers. And then I can just go into the control now because they look a bit small. So I can just bump them up to maybe 30 and 70. And then we can adjust the number of circles. So already it's kind of looking interesting in terms of sort of what we can create and what we can change just based on the control null. So, I mean, at this stage, if you follow along this much, already you should start to be getting, excited about maybe the creative possibilities of what you can do with this. Just going back to the animation that I created, I just want to talk a little bit about sort of finessing and pushing the idea. Because we've only got 10 minutes left, and there's quite the procedural stuff in this is very expression based and probably a bit boring if you're not really into that sort of stuff. So the first version, I actually rendered out each version, not that I was necessarily happy with it, but I wanted a reference for each stage of what I was outputting. So the first one we're just going to look at again, and so that's this. So this actually didn't have the different scale of the dots. What I did was added an expression to give that sort of bouncy effect. And in this case, there's quite a few expressions for adding bounce to layers when you've got keyframes. So one that I've used for years is this Harry Frank Inertial Bounce. I've just sort of copied this expression code and then pasted it onto a layer. Just going to very quickly animate this to show you. So we've got horrible linear keyframes, but if we alt click and then paste that expression code, you can see here at the top, we've got amplitude, frequency, and decay, which we can adjust, but already that gives us a nice sort of bouncy effect. If I alt click on that, get rid of it. There's also Duet Basil, which is free to download, and I definitely recommend definitely recommend using it. I mean, if you're into character animation, obviously it's great. You probably already heard of it, but it's also got a lot of tools that sort of set up expression rigs for you. Now, if we click on Cleaner, it puts in a load of code in there, which is scary. Close it. Don't even look at it. Don't worry about it. Just look at the controls that it's given you, and you've got checkboxes for anticipation. So it's actually, you can see it's moving before the first keyframe, and we're just going to uncheck that. But you've got nice bounce, and the follow through. You can adjust these values to whatever your preferences are. That's just a couple. There's lots out there, but all the ones that I knew of only worked based on the keyframes. You had to apply them to whichever value you were keyframing. Now, in our example, that's not going to work because these don't have keyframes. Press U, there's no keyframes on them. And I know this isn't going to work, but just to show you, if we've got keyframes on here, so it's moving. But if I alt-click on the position, well, I mean, if I added that expression code before this, it's not going to work. I mean, it's, there's already expression code in there. I mean, it doesn't give us an error, but it doesn't, it doesn't create any bounce on there. I just noticed in the question, in the chat, there's, sorry, Mark is asking if the project file is going to be available for download. When Escape put this on their YouTube page, I'm going to post a Gumroad link to the project files, which you can download for free. So yes, they will be. And you can dig in. It's probably going to be a lot easier to dig into the projects and sort of work backwards. So I'll post the final version, because I realized I've sort of waffled on about particular expressions for quite a while, and I haven't got to the development of the sort of finessed final animation. But just talking about that briefly, I'm going to end on that, I think. So anyway, the expression code, the way that I figured it out was, I didn't figure it out. I went to Dan Ebbert's site, Motion Script, and it's not, he's not one of these new YouTube, tutorial guys. He's been doing it years, so his site is possibly a bit dry for someone who wants whiz bang, content. But he really knows his stuff with expressions, and I actually reached out to him and asked him for help. I took one of his expressions, which does give you a bounce effect, and he amended it for me and sent it back, and basically gave me an expression that I'll show you. And again, it'll be in the project file, but let's go to this layer, and we press P. So this expression code here was him helping out, and it's within there, it's actually saying to refer to the keyframes of the path, the mask path, rather than the keyframes. So that's, I mean, if you're struggling, if you need help with expressions, and God knows I do and still do, there's go and create a cow. If any of you haven't used this before, this is a resource from back when I started out doing motion graphics, and there's always people out there who've been doing it years who are willing to help out. You post a question on there, and they'll do their best to answer. There's really helpful people out there. But the final version, it was about sort of looking at, you've set up all the parameters and all the expressions, and you can just focus on the animation and sort of finessing it. So part of it was like guiding the eye, what is making these dots move, what's instigating them. And sometimes you need an action that sparks off another action, you know, so it's not arbitrary, it's not coming out of nowhere. So that's why in the first version, which is pretty crude, you know, you've got these row of dots are sliding in from your, you know, your left, my left, your right. So they're sliding in from there, because what this is doing is it's guiding the eye. You know, your eye is immediately drawn to the ones that are still moving. So because the ones on the right have settled into place, your eye is drawn to the left, and then that's why the timing of them is slightly staggered. So you've got the Y animating, and then the A, and then the, you know, then the other Y. And then, you know, you just look at it and go, well, you know, these look like pretty crappy martini glasses. I don't particularly like how those Ys look. So, you know, get rid of the horizontal on those and reduce the letters down to, you know, as basic geometric shapes as you can. And, you know, I had a guide for that. I used this, so this dot line font, which I think is available for free. But if you go on defont.com, and you can do a search, and I typed in dot, and you've got other, you know, I mean, it's come back with 114 results, but you know, you'll find something that you can use as a guide. And then, you know, and then just looking at the design of it and going, well, you know, how can you make it more interesting and how, you know, and more finessed? So I'm just looking at the chat. Might have to stop soon, not sure. Oh, okay, sorry. Got 1 minute left. So I think, yeah, so I think it's probably time to wrap up. But yeah, so I'm going to make so if you're watching this on YouTube, hopefully there's a link to the project file below. And thanks for joining.